Hi, I'm Selena, and today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of June. So I read 17 things total. 15 of those things were fiction, and 2 of those things were nonfiction books. 8 of the 15 fiction books, did I say 15? I did say 15. 8 of the 15 fiction things were novels. In there, I also had 3 novellas, 3 short stories, and 1 graphic novel. As for ratings, I left 3 of the books that I read this month unrated for reasons I will get to in a second, but I also had 0 1-star, 1 2-star, 5 3-stars, 2 4-stars, 2 4.5 stars, and 4 5-stars. As for genre, I was kind of all over the place. I read 2 sci-fi books, 2 contemporary, 2-ish romance, but maybe one of them's contemporary. I don't really know. I think the graphic novel I consider kind of a romance, but it's also not really, along with 7 fantasy books and 2 classics. As for age ranges, I had 0 children / middle grade books, but I did have 4 YA books and 10 things that are geared towards adults. And some of the books that I read, I don't put into these genre categories because they're nonfiction or whatever the reason may be. But now that we got those stats out of the way, let's get into the books that I left unrated this month. So I left 3 of the books that I read unrated for various reasons, which I'll get into. The first one of those is Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. I talked about this book extensively in my classics wrap-up for June, which I will link up there somewhere. That is already up, and you can watch that if you're interested in my full thoughts on this book and why I left it unrated. But since I have a lot of things, I am going to move on. The next thing I left unrated was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I'm not really going to spend too much time about this because you've probably heard of it. It's a book by a white woman about anti-racism and her role in white supremacy and how she tries to undo it. I don't want to give too much attention to this book because it's getting a lot of attention right now, and frankly, more attention should be going to the books about anti-racism by actual people of color, in my opinion. So we're gonna move on. Not saying this is a bad book. I don't feel like I'm the one to make that judgment call, but I do want to highlight in this wrap-up White Rage by Carol Anderson. White Rage is very much a very historical-based book about anti-racism and white supremacy. It's very much trying to give you the tools so you can understand where white supremacy comes from and why it is still present and how it has been maintained by every white person in America today and throughout history. And the thesis of this book is basically that the root of a lot of the oppression that has been dealt towards Black people in America is because of white rage at Black excellence. It really digs into how every single progression in civil rights has been met with several different ways to target that and undo those steps of progression. And so it really goes into, in detail, why it is not okay to say, it's 2020, things are better now. Because really, Anderson argues and convinced me, I was already kind of there, but I have a lot more tools to discuss this now, that this has not gone away. White supremacy and systematic racism is there, and also personal racism that stems from the systematic racism. This book is largely historical. It is very much telling you about the various events throughout America that has had something to do with the oppression of Black people. And at times, the gaining of civil rights, which is always met by the stripping of civil rights. And so it really does go era by era, and it does end with the present. And I really think it is not possible to get everything out of this book on one reading. I also read it with an audiobook, and so I definitely need to acquire a physical copy for my reread to really highlight parts and really engage with this text a lot more. I'm happy I read it, but I didn't rate this book or White Fragility. I don't really rate nonfiction as a rule, first of all, because I don't generally read nonfiction for enjoyment. And specifically with these, I was reading them to learn and to try and educate myself. And when I'm reading history books for my history degree, I don't rate those. And so my scale of rating doesn't really include nonfiction, and especially more educational nonfiction. If I'm reading it for a certain purpose and that purpose is education and getting facts out of it, then that doesn't translate into a rating very well. And so I didn't rate it. I still highly recommend White Rage though. Moving on to the actual star ratings I gave nothing 1 star, and I only gave one thing 2 stars, and that was a short story called Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell by Brandon Sanderson. It's a short story that takes place on a world called Threnody in his Cosmere universe. I read several short stories from this particular bind-up, which has a lot of short stories and novellas that take place in his connected fantasy universe called the Cosmere. And I didn't really like Silence. I really didn't. I didn't like this short story at all. I thought it was weird. I thought it specifically was weird because it felt like a Toni Morrison story or something. And it felt coded in a really weird way. Beyond that, I thought it was boring. So I gave it 2 stars. Then I'm going to go through 3 of my 3 stars really quickly because they are also from this volume of Arcanum Unbounded, and those were Mistborn Secret History, The Emperor's Soul, and Six of the Dusk. I don't know. Out of those, my favorite was Mistborn Secret History, probably because I already understood most of the world that we were presented. I just feel like with the kind of world building that Sanderson creates and needs to do for his books, short stories and novellas are not really the way to do that, and The Emperor's Soul and Six of the Dusk were very different worlds that we had never seen before. Well, one of them we'd seen before, but it was a different part of the world. And I thought Mistborn Secret History was enjoyable, but the other 2 I just thought were meh and kind of boring. So those are 3 stars. My next 3 star was Check Please, Volume 1 by Ngozi Ukazu, I believe. This is half of a webcomic / 2 volumes of a graphic novel that follows a group of students who play hockey for Samwell University, and you specifically follow the newest member of Samwell University's hockey team called Eric Biddle, who is otherwise known as Biddy. And Biddy is very small, he's a little bit scared, he's very southern, he's very into baking, and he's not necessarily what you would think when you think of like a hockey player, but no one on this team really is. And he's also gay, and he has a bit of a crush on one of his teammates, and there's just a lot of fun banter and cute stuff going on in this. I had this considered as a romance for my stats, but I honestly don't think I would really consider it as a romance because it's got a lot going on, and the romance doesn't take as much of a forefront as I thought it would. So I've actually read this, I think, a good majority, if not the whole graphic novel before it was a graphic novel, and I read it when it was still coming out as a webcomic on Tumblr. I really enjoyed it back then. I enjoyed it again this time. I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it doesn't really stick with me, and so that's why I gave it 3 stars. In my highest 3-star spot of the month, my final 3 stars I gave this month was for Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So I hated a lot of this book, and I was disturbed by a lot of this book, and this book has extremely problematic elements in it. And it's still my favorite 3-star thing that I read this month because it made me feel something. It made me feel disturbed. It succeeded in being disturbing. I just have pretty meh, kind of enjoyable, but I'm not super in love with it feelings about all my other 3 stars. And so Ender's Game, to have me have like kind of a visceral reaction to it, I think makes it the one that I feel affected me the most, and so that's why it's in the spot it is. This is a story about a boy named Ender who is basically recruited by his government to train in order to fight the buggers, which are the aliens that Earth has been fighting for many years. And Ender, there's continually more and more pressure put on Ender. He's taken from the time that he's 6, and so he is raised in order to be a killer in a lot of ways. This story has its problematic elements, let me tell you. I saw racism, I saw kind of anti-Semitism, I saw sexism. I felt like there was a weird sexual undertone going on, or like hints of sexual abuse, which like was just my interpretation. There's nothing explicit about sexual abuse in this book at all, but like I don't know, it just and it's also very disturbing plot-wise, which is separate from the problematic elements, but just it's a very disturbing book. You deal with a lot of disturbing characters with disturbing motives who are doing disturbing things to kids. But it's also supposed to be like that, so I kind of congratulate it for disturbing me in the ways that it was supposed to. Also, I'm never a fan of the whole murderous children thing that you see in books like Lord of the Flies. Like, it doesn't ever really appeal to me, and I do think that Ender's Game was a much better execution of this trope and this plot archetype than Lord of the Flies, but I don't know what's gonna make me like this trope. Basically, what I have to say for this book is I didn't like it, but at least I was like mildly entertained and pretty disturbed by it. Moving on to my 4-star books, my first 4-star that I'm going to talk about is Dear Haiti, Love Alaine by Maika Moulit and Maritza Moulit. This book is about a girl named Alaine who is sent to Haiti after she causes some trouble. She gets into some trouble in her school, and her family sends her to Haiti, and while there, she kind of learns a lot more about her heritage. She gets closer to her mom. She learns a lot more about her family history and some of the darker secrets of her family's past. And that's pretty much the pitch for this. It's also an epistolary novel, and so it's told in a lot of different formats, like emails and letters and some diary entries, project entries, etc. I know from the cover of this book it seems like it will be light and fluffy, but it's actually pretty dark when you get there. This book deals with a lot of dark issues, and so I will be leaving trigger warnings down below for this book, maybe Ender's Game and anything else I think needs them. I thought this book was pretty slow pacing wise until the end, when you start to see kind of the point of what's going on, but I do think this book also skips some pretty key moments, like kind of just skips right over them, and it's a little bit hard to put things together after that, and so I do think this book definitely struggles a little bit with pacing, especially because I think the epistolary format doesn't really do any favors in that way, because you'll be switching from different formats so often that you kind of have to piece the story together, and it can feel a little bit less coherent at times. Yeah, I do think this novel changes so fast at times it is hard to latch onto. One thing I did latch onto, though, was Alaine. I really enjoyed Elaine's character. I really enjoyed seeing her grow throughout the book and see her come to terms with some difficult things that are going on in her life. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. For a bit there, I was a little bit surprised that it made it to 4 stars because the pacing, I'm really plot driven, so I need a really strong plot, and I feel like this book doesn't really have that, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just my personal taste. But by the end, I underestimated how attached I was to the characters and how happy I was gonna be, or at least like bittersweet this was gonna feel. And then the next thing that I gave 4 stars, and the last thing I gave 4 stars, and this was probably my favorite 4 stars, and that was Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson. This is the thing that I loved most out of Arcanum Unbounded. This is a Stormlight Archive novella taking place between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. If you don't know, I finished Words of Radiance in April, and I've been reading Arcanum Unbounded basically since, and I'm going to be starting on Oathbringer really soon, and so it was time for me to read Edgedancer, and I really enjoyed it. This novella follows Lift, and I really enjoy Lift. Everyone really enjoys Lift. I really thought that this book was kind of a mixture of really fun and fast and cute narration from Lift and funny dynamics between characters, and also furthering Lift's character arc and plot enough to get her to where she is in Oathbringer. At least that's what I've heard Edgedancer does, and I thought it did it in a really fun way. I could not stop reading this. I read it in a day, which is like, I usually had to force myself to read this stuff in Arcanum Unbounded, but I really enjoyed Edgedancer. I thought it was just really fun to be back in Roshar and the world of like my pretty much new favorite series, and yeah, I just ate this novella up like so fast. Moving into my 4.5 stars, I have Meet Cute Club by Jack Harvin as the first one, and I really like this one. This is a short little novel, romance novel, about this guy named Jordan who is obsessed with romance and runs Meet Cute Club, which is his romance book club where he and his friends read romance novels. And he meets this guy named Rex at a bookstore that he frequents often, and Rex kind of makes fun of his stacks of romance books, and Jack defends these books very passionately, and then Rex gets a little curious and starts attending his romance book club, and there he learns about romance as a genre and also how it can fit into his real life. So romance is not my thing, but I was really impressed by this one, and so I gave it 4.5 stars. This was a really sweet book with a really sweet ending. I thought the ending was phenomenal. The characters have a lot going on individually in their own lives, which I really liked. I like it when 2 characters feel separate and then just come together in a romance. I do wish I'd gotten a little bit more from their personalities. I think I got a lot about their personalities, but something about it I would have liked to see, I don't know, I would have liked to see a little bit more before the romance started, and I think that I would have been more invested in the romance overall if I felt like I knew the characters a little bit better, just a little bit better. But also take this with a grain of salt, because I'm not a romance reader. Romance is not the thing I read for, and romance readers may not have a problem with this. The part of this book that I really, really enjoyed was, this is kind of also, as much of as it is a romance book, this is kind of a love letter to the romance genre and to reading and books as a whole. And there were so many things about myself that I could see in these books, in this book, and these characters, and I love that they both loved reading. I thought it was really sweet how they came together over reading. It's kind of like, if you're a romance lover and you're a bookworm, like, this is like your dream book, and I think you should check it out. Moving on to my next 4.5 star of the month, that book is Daughters of Enri by Rennie K. Amayo. So this book is about two twins who were separated at birth named Sinai and Nala, and they are the last living remnants of the dead earth goddess, and it's about them living their separate lives and kind of realizing who they are. And that's kind of all I want to tell you about this book, but that's kind of the premise, and you can go into it from there. I loved this book. I thought it was a really good kind of YA fantasy. I thought it was really easy to read with a really nice writing style, and really characters it was easy to latch onto, in a world that is built so beautifully and in such a way that I was hooked. The world and the magic alone, I mean, they are so much of my love for this book, because they are just that good. And I love worlds and magic in my books as well, but like this one, yeah, it has some good ones. The writing had a few little nitpicky things that I was, nitpicking about, but so if you're like a writing snob, this might not completely work for you, but it didn't really damper my enjoyment all that much. As for characters, I loved Sinai, which is one of our twins, and I loved her plotline, and I loved following her. I didn't love following Nala as much. I felt like Sinai had a lot more stuff kind of thrown at her that she had to contend with, whereas Nala, I don't know that we did much with Nala. I would have liked to see a little bit more development from Nala, and I would have liked to see her plot have a little bit more substance, I guess. In general, I just wish that the characters had pushed the plot forward a little bit more. There were times when they did push the plot and they did control where the plot went, and I could tell they had agency, but I would have liked for them to have a little bit more agency in other areas too of the plot, because at a lot of times it kind of felt like they were pulled along by like a force or like a feeling, or like it was kind of, things seemed to happen on a whim, or the plot would push them directly into something, and I would have liked to see them make more choices. They do make choices, and when they do make choices, it's always very interesting, but then there's a little bit of time where they are dragged along, and then they make more choices and they're kind of dragged along. I would have liked to see them take more control of their own plot. The ending happened a bit quickly, and it lasted not very long, but I was really interested in the ending. I really did enjoy where we ended, and I'm very excited for book 2. So, the ending did what it was meant to do. Yeah, and I have criticisms, and I gave it this high of a rating because I do think those criticisms, first of all, didn't really impact my enjoyment that much of the book. I just kind of noticed them and wanted to note them. But I do also think that for a debut, like, those kind of things are kind of understandable more. I can forgive this a little bit more, and I do think that some of the problems will fix themselves by book 2, or at least I hope that's what's gonna happen. Yeah, this rating could maybe drop till 4 stars if I get out of the new book reading high, because I just finished this book. But, I really enjoyed this book, and I do anticipate it if you're looking for a fantasy like this. On to my 5-star books. I first want to mention the short story that I read that was 5 stars. This was an Udi recommendation. He bugged me until I physically sat on FaceTime with him and read this short story, and honestly, he was right about it. It's called The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, and this story won 3 really big awards or something, like the big fantasy awards or whatever, and it deserves every single one of them. After reading it, I've determined that, because my word means a lot. Anyways, I thought this was a beautiful short story. It is kind of just really beautiful. If you're into origami, if you're interested in seeing how racism can kind of divide a family, and how people can grow to resent their own cultures, then I think Paper Menagerie might be a good story for you to check out. It was really good. I loved it. I thought it was very beautiful. The next 5-star I want to mention is Cress by Marissa Meyer. This is a sci-fi fairy tale retelling of Rapunzel. This is the third book in the Lunar Chronicles, which are all sci-fi retellings of various like fairy tales. This was my favorite in the series so far. It's the only one I've given 5 stars. I loved following Cress. She's such an awkward and funny main character. I loved following our crew and seeing our crew dynamics. I loved the romance. I thought I was really invested in the romance. I really loved seeing more of Thorn. Thorn has been my favorite. I loved his role in this book. The plot of this book was my favorite in the series so far. I loved where this plot took us and how it progressed the series. I will say this book has some problematic elements in how it depicts race and ethnicity, and I just wanted to make that clear. I will have more information in my Goodreads review, which I will link. And lastly, I loved the ending of this book. I am very excited for winter, and I will be getting to it as soon as possible. Then I am going to mention really quickly one of my favorite books, one of my top 2 favorite books of the month, and I've already talked about it, and that is I Captured the Castle by Dottie Smith. You can see me talk more about this book in my June Classics wrap-up. Look at that! I ranted about this for 8 whole minutes. You should go and check that out if you want more. If you want more information on why this is now one of my favorite classics and why it was one of my favorite books of the month. Finally, my other favorite book, my final 5-star of the month, was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. I loved this book, and when I tell you I loved this book, I need you to understand how deeply I loved this book. I loved our main character, Liz Leidy. She was very shy and kind of quiet and didn't like attention drawn to herself at first, and then she kind of realizes she's allowed to kind of take space and take up space, and I loved how she gained confidence. I loved the varied friendship dynamics that Liz has with various people and the family dynamics. I thought they were really well done, and they aren't always perfect. They aren't always like not messy. Like she has a lot of messy relationships at times, like all of us do at times, and how friendships are hard, and I loved that how this book went into that. I thought the romance was adorable. I loved it. This is a sapphic book. There are 2 girls who have crushes on each other, and I thought it was really sweet to get to see that. I liked that they had chemistry, and they were cute, and they just got to be kind of cute and happy and fun. They weren't over-sexualized. It wasn't this weird tragedy type thing or like bittersweet. Like it wasn't anything like that. It was really just sweet and so good. Had to readjust because my camera shut off, so that was great. Anyways, what I was wanting to say was that You Should See Me in a Crown deals a lot with like self-love and also themes of the intersection of racism and homophobia, especially in a school environment, and how the administration and certain institutions of the school can participate in this and propagate it, or I think perpetrate, it might be the better word, perpetrate. I really loved this book. This is getting a lot of hype right now. I highly recommend it. It is worth all of the hype. Tell me what your favorite book you read in the month of June was, or your favorite book that you read recently. These are the books, some of the books that I read in the month of June. Talk to me about which ones you like, want to read, etc. in the comments, and I will see you next time. Bye.